Welcome to another episode of Overcome Out Loud with Charlie Smith. This podcast is committed to sharing the stories of people that have overcome adversity and challenge in their lives to give other people hope. You know, I found so many people suffer in silence that by sharing our overcome stories and the mountains that we've had to climb, we can give other people hope and lessons. And I'm so excited today, and it's been a little bit nostalgic to have with me my guest today, Andrew McKenna. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And we'll get into all of the incredible lessons. And I personally want to thank you for, you know, both the vulnerability and the courage that you've had in walking your path so publicly. Andrew is, you know, I'll say both an inspirational and motivational speaker. I think his story is powerful in both respects. It gives people inspiration that no matter where they are and what they've fallen to, that they can get back up and move forward. And I think it motivates people to do that. He's the author of an incredible book called Sheer Madness: From Federal Prosecutor. That's right. Federal prosecutor to federal prisoner. And we're going to get into all that rear view mirror stuff and how he's turned that into, I think, you know, we'll say, you know, it's amazing how people can turn, you know, their setbacks into a comeback or their mess into a miracle. And you've done both. And so I personally thank you for the courage and the voice that you've given, overcoming adversity. And you had some down days, some really dark spots in your life. And we'll get into all that. And, you know, so from an origin standpoint, you know, I think where people come from, I've always used it as kind of a bit of a barometer and a bit of a GPS as to where we go. It all starts somewhere. So I know you grew up in a small town in upstate New York. Can you share a little bit about what your early days were like, Andrew?
Sure. So I grew up in a little town called Schenectady, New York, and it's up near Albany, the capital, of course. And it's a city, technically, but it's a very, very small city. It has a lot of charm, but it also has a lot of problems. And there's, you know, it's a GE town, an old GE town from the
Right.
60s and 70s. And they started to pull out and move south and moved overseas and stuff. And so they let a lot of, left a lot behind, but also a lot of history. I grew up in a very normal, you know, I guess you could say normal, you know, we always joke about what does normal mean, but, you know, grew up in a 2-parent household, 3 older siblings. My father was a college professor for 50 years at a small school called Siena College.
Oh yeah.
My mom was a French and English teacher at Shaker Middle School up in Colony, and I know you know the area a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So I grew up with educators, and my dad was a kind of a not a tough guy. He was a smart guy, but he grew up kind of in a tough neighborhood in the Bronx, in an Irish neighborhood in the Bronx back in the old days. And my mom was from rural Vermont, and she was one of the, you know, the pioneers for females at that point to go on to get master's degrees, and, you know, in music and French. And so there was a lot going on in the household, but there was always sort of an undertone of peace and quiet and encouragement, and also a sense of the importance of equality, especially for my father. He grew up with parents that were from Ireland, came over, and you know, there was an element of bigotry, and this is in my mind now because I was just writing about it this morning, so that's why it's top of mind. But he never passed that on to his children. You know, everybody got a fair shot, and he respected people that worked hard. He didn't understand mental illness, certainly, like we understand it today, and neither did my mom. And so growing up, I didn't know, but I suffered from depression and worry and anxiety and all these things. And I think they probably assumed a lot of it was just normal childhood angst, I guess is the best way to put it. But I remember, and I always tell this story, I remember being about 8 years old and lying in the middle of this big open field at the local elementary school, Charlie, and staring at the sky and saying, what is my purpose? What am I doing here? How did we all get here? And just having these, very existential sort of thoughts. And I found that, looking back, I just think that that's unusual for an 8-year-old. But you couldn't express any sort of sadness or depression back in those days. It was always, okay, quit moping around and go out and play or go out and do something. So definitely a different upbringing, but compared to some of the upbringings of the folks that I work with, and certainly folks that I prosecuted and folks that I was in prison with, I had it easy. And that's a main factor in some of the work that I've been doing lately.
Yeah, I think that there's so many things about that are really important. I mean, we can see from the exterior. My father was a mean college professor. He was a violent man, but a college professor. My mom was a first grade school teacher. Kind of interesting, some of the similarities.
Sure.
So, but not a lot of peace in my house, but we don't know where this instability comes from as children. They say that being rejected from the cool kids table reduces as many internal opioids as a traumatic event at home. I mean, these little things of rejection, these little kind of fears or insecurities that can creep up as a kid, they get implanted somewhere. And I think it's so great that you would point out that you don't necessarily knew where these existential thoughts came from, but they had to have created pressure on an 8-year-old who's, really just supposed to be enjoying life, right up to bat at Little League, playing with his friends in the dirt lots, but you all of a sudden at 8 years old somewhere, and I don't know if you've looked where that initial kind of worry came from, but I think worry is something that's transferred very quickly into fear and anxiety that we want to escape, and obviously that comes about for you, but it's amazing to me that we don't have to have these. I think that's one of the kind of misconceptions about trauma, if you will, is that it doesn't have to be these violent episodes, these massive things that could happen, that there's these little subtle things that we could experience as kids that just shift our perspective and our programming a little bit. But boy, it sticks, doesn't it?
It sticks, and it's powerful. And explaining that to people, even of the current generation, is very difficult. Many people, as you mentioned, are still in the belief that trauma is coming back from a war, or being a first responder and responding to an active shooter situation, or being in something very serious. So there's a great therapist that always talks about trauma with a capital T and trauma with a lowercase t, but only in its description. Like what you said really caught my ear, not sitting at the cool kids table. That piece of rejection as a young child is that those are the early years when you're building your lens about yourself and how you see the world, but really about yourself. And something like that, I worry. I'm a natural worrier, and this is what I talk about with my therapist all the time. But my 15-year-old, I'm always worried about his feelings, to the point where it affects my life. And so where does that come from? That must come from something that I went through, because I know that stuff that you and I were just talking about as an 8-year-old, that worry, those thoughts. Why wasn't I just as free, happy, loving, joyful child? But for some reason I wasn't. And I played Little League and I played sports and stuff like that. But I was always had this feeling of some weight on my shoulders. And so I've explored it somewhat. And of course, there could be some subconscious things, some things that I've buried from a child. And, I'm not suggesting child sexual abuse. I'm not suggesting, because I don't know, but I'm not ruling out anything. Something happened. And the issue is I carried that into my teens and into college and into my 30s. And it's something that I still struggle with on a daily basis.
It's so important because, you know, what you don't deal with will deal with you. And I think at a young age, we don't even know what we're dealing with. And that's why it's so important, you know, when people like you speak to younger generations, that we continue to emphasize. In fact, I was on the phone with a performance coach this morning talking about the importance of emphasizing in every presentation we give the courage and the strength that it takes to ask for help at any age, and that it's a sign of self-compassion. It's a sign of strength. It is, you know, what most really successful people have gotten good at is asking for help. But somehow we have this mentality of, you know, fall down 7, up 8 times, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, son, you know, but really it's hard sometimes, and it's hard to get back up. And so I'm so just appreciative of you mentioning how trapped you felt in the inability, because it wasn't very common for us to ask for help. Our parents didn't know how to get us help, even if we'd asked for it, because there was so much stigma around, you know, mental health and the understanding of it. And I think that we'll just take that moment for you to recognize that you didn't, even though you didn't know what was going on, talking about it sure wasn't an option at that point. It was bury stuff and just try to be, like you said earlier when we started, just try to be normal. Really?
Right. I know, that's the thing. And you nailed it right on that. And thanks for saying what you did. I appreciate that. And same thing, when I speak to groups, I say it 50 different ways, but the point is ask for help. And I also say, let's say I'm speaking to a group of lawyers, or I spoke to a group of, you know, NFL players, not a group, but it was a fundraiser, and whatever group it is, we also as individuals have a responsibility to look at the person next to us and recognize someone else that might be struggling. I feel we have a responsibility under the social contract, or however you want to look at it, is to kind of like pick that person up. How are you doing? The suicide rates, you know, are incredibly high right now. And as far as I know, there was never a period when they were incredibly low. So, you know, picking someone else up, lending an ear, trying to help out. I love that meme, Charlie, that, you know, you see on social media. It's be nice to everybody. You have no idea what they're going through. So I talk about my son because these are really formative years for him. And I think back to my own teenage years where I was just reckless and wild. A lot of that was burying, you know, my anxiety, but really imparting that, help each other out. This is all we have. And I think COVID taught us a lot of lessons, but this is really, we only have each other in this. Maybe somebody says that's corny or something, but frankly, I don't care, because it's the truth.
Yeah, I think I think science will prove out that human connection is innate to our survival, and to deny it is kind of a bit ignorant. By that I just mean not knowing, but human connection and reliance on our fellow man is foundational to our survival. And, you know, just as a segue, I'll share with you, which I think you'll find interesting, that we spend a lot of time, you know, addressing mental health. We don't spend enough time addressing mental health issues. And so, you know, between the years of 1967 and the year 2000, there were over 97,000 psychological abstracts done on worry, anxiety, and depression. During that same time period, happiness, well-being, and hope, 5,000. You know, we don't teach, you know, it's one thing to get people to zero and say, okay, you're now, you know, not as depressed and you're now not dealing with your anxiety, but let's get you to thrive, and teaching people the skills that they need to overcome. Because in the history of telling someone to stop worrying, no one's ever stopped worrying. But if you focus on things like gratitude, and if you focus on the things that are going well in your life, and you do that over an extended period of time, you can incrementally start to not worry as much, or start to see more good things. But, you know, I think we just don't spend enough time with mental health, you know, not just a lack of mental illness, but actually being mentally healthy, and what that looks like. And I see you as someone who's really on the front lines of changing that narrative. So thank you. And, you know, it's interesting, right? Because with a group, with a house of educators and a few older brothers, you didn't make it through high school, did you there, boss?
No, I didn't. And the funny thing too is, my father was a romantics language professor, so he spoke fluently Spanish and other languages, and he taught Spanish history. My mom was a language teacher. None of the children speak a second language. We barely speak English correctly. So yeah, I didn't. I dropped out of school in the 11th grade, and people said, well, why? And I said, I'm bored, I'm getting in trouble, and I want to get out of Schenectady. And I always had this strange fear that I would never get out of Schenectady. And there's nothing wrong with Schenectady. It's a great place, the restaurants, and Albany a bit, Charlie, and Schenectady's a wonderful place. But there's always this thing, like, I'm never going to get out. And I started feeling like I was tumbling. So I went to an Air Force recruiter, and he said, of course, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't know. I guess I want to fly planes. And he goes, okay, you can fly planes. Well, of course, I hadn't been to college yet, and I was 17, and he got me into the Air Force. Let's put it this way. And I was grateful now looking back. But he got me into this really cool job. So I wasn't flying planes, but I was attached to an Army infantry unit. Became a forward air controller. So I was on the ground with the radio, talking to the pilot, flying around a target area and directing his munitions fired from his aircraft onto targets. And we didn't have any wars going on at the time, thank God. So it was all simulation and training. But, looking back, I mean, we were ready to go. If we had to pack up, we were ready to go. But yeah, I didn't. And then I went and took my GED while I was in active duty. That was the one caveat. I had to get my GED. And so I did that. And my first duty station, my only duty station other than training, was Hawaii. So here I am, 18-year-old kid, great shape, young, and here I am in paradise for 3 years. So
was there any quite a shift? I mean, it's funny because I talk about my journey from southern Maine to California is just a series of escapes, and what I was always trying to escape was me, right? I thought if I just got somewhere else, whether it was out of Scarborough or out of Fairfield, or I got to California, I never made it across the Pacific as you did, but you got far away from that fear. You fear I'm not going to get out of Schenectady, and sure enough, you end up in Hawaii. But was it you talked about kind of tumbling and being bored? Was there a sense of just kind of thinking that if I got somewhere else, I could feel differently, or were you trying to? Do you know if there was an attachment to just kind of just whatever the existing situation was? If I could change it, I could change the way I feel, and it was. But they say wherever you go, there you are. That kept happening.
That kept happening, and that's sort of the geographic solution or the cure, but it never really works. You really have to stay planted. Of course, at the time, I think I made the right decision, but as an adult, you're the same person. So you change maybe your location. Pardon me, Charlie. But really, it could be wanderlust when it comes to occupations and professions. It could be, Marine Corps judge advocate general as an attorney for the Marines. That wasn't good enough. I had to have a job with being a prosecutor with the Justice Department. But all of a sudden, after a year and a half, that wasn't good enough. So I applied to be a CIA officer. That wasn't good enough. So then I needed, it was one thing after the next. And then I needed to be, an associate in one of the, top 10 firms in the country. But what the heck was I thinking? You can have a normal career, but that's not normal. Every day sitting in your office, doing a really, really good job, which I did. And I'm proud of the work that I did. And I got praised for that, but somehow still that wasn't enough. There's something inside of me that was lost, that couldn't be filled. And that's really continued to stick with me. And when I lecture about it, I try to get folks to identify with that exact piece and, look at yourself. Don't compare yourself to what's going around you. And, you are good enough. You're loved, you're liked. Take some time to love and like yourself, and try to find that. It's so difficult, but once people hear it and once people talk about it, to a professional or to a friend or to a non-credentialed person, then it helps. But that's where people have to end up, or it's going to be a really shaky road ahead. And I see it every day, and I know you do as well. We get the phone calls about it.
And what I hear so loudly, it's incredible to me, and I want to bring some context to it, because we can call it a lot of things. The best term I've come up with is destination disease, and it's like that idea that when and it's wherever I get, if I continue to place my happiness, my fulfillment, my self-worth, my self-esteem, in something outside of myself, then whenever I achieve it, and you've just described, and we can talk more about these pieces, but you went from dropping out of high school to going into the military, to going to become a lawyer, to achieving several rungs of success. And still, and I always talk about these two dials, beliefs and behaviors, still inside you didn't feel worthy of it. And you attached your worth to an event, to an outcome. And when that outcome came, because you attached your worth to it, it was never enough. You never felt like you deserved it. I think people would call that, a little bit of an imposter syndrome that a lot of people face, but you're just trying to behave yourself or achieve yourself into feeling good about yourself. There's self-esteem, and then there's others' esteem. And it seems like that chasing others' esteem, like this will define me. It's exhausting, first of all, and it's insatiable, right? Because it was never, because you didn't have that internal belief that you were good enough. You were trying to find that everywhere else, and you couldn't. It was insatiable. That's what it sounds like.
Absolutely insatiable, and really, the belief system that will, that next job, that next relationship, that next step, whatever it is somehow going to fix something, just isn't a reality. And I see it with young kids. I see it with executives in their 60s and 70s, and it's absolutely amazing. And something you said made me think of something, the sense of chasing the dragon, like, for people who have used opioids, for instance, always trying to catch that first feeling that you had the first time that you used. And there's parallels to that, because it doesn't matter. You could be, clean. You could be somebody who's never done drugs or never used alcohol. But it can pop up in other ways. And so that was just another one of my things to escape and get rid of these feelings that I refused to sit with. I refused to sit with anything uncomfortable. And it absolutely led to a life of wreckage. I know. And when I speak to people in some of these companies, I know that if I put my mind to it, I can polish it up. I'm a quick study, and I'll do well at it. I'll shine at it, and I'll be put like up here, like, this is Andrew McKenna, and look what all that we can do. But it's a bunch of BS. It's BS, because I don't feel good inside. I feel like a con man, I feel like a con man. And even in conversations that I have today, 52 years old, and I'm at an event, and someone's asking me what I'm doing, and I'm telling them the truth, exactly what I do. And this is rare now, because I put a lot of work in, and this isn't the way I am, the way that I used to be. But that old feeling crept up of insecurity, and this person's going to find out that I'm a fraud, right? And so I kind of got out of the conversation gracefully, went away. There's probably about 300 people at the event, found a little spot, sat down, talked myself through it mentally. And I had to tell myself, Andrew, you're not a fraud. You know, that's that old pathway in your brain that's creeping in to your system. And, you know, do what you normally do. You know, you have the tools to deal with this. And you're telling the truth, and you're doing fine, pal. You know, and that's that comfortable self-talk that a therapist years ago taught me. And with practice it comes. But I'll tell you, for that to pop up in the context that it did the other night, it's a scary feeling. You know, this is it's not a difficult thing, so long as you practice. And even practicing isn't difficult.
Yeah, what I'll say in response to that is simply good. Good. I'm glad, you know, for me, it's like that just shows I view feelings now like signal lights. You know, they're out there in the streets for a reason. You know, I get green lights where I can just keep going. There's yellow lights where I'm like, what is that? You know, what's coming up for me? And then there's red lights where it's like, you know what? Step away from the conversation. I have a set of skills that I've learned to deal with this, because it's the avoidance. It's the driving through the red light. It's the not leaving the conversation, not having the ability to talk to yourself. Right. So, I mean, for you being in the profession you're in, you know, that you got this pocket jury, and it fucking is trying to find you guilty of everything, whether you've done it or not. And it just doesn't like you. And, you know, I would say I'm an amateur, you know, arguing attorney for myself. You happen to have a lot more skills in that area, but we do need to advocate for ourselves. We do need, you know, to have a script, a healthy self-talk script. So when those red lights come up, we don't hurt ourselves. We don't hurt somebody else. We don't look to escape from it. We just go, oh, I'm in red light. How do I get back to green? How do I get back to center? How do I get back to self-regulation where I can have an honest conversation and deal with the fact that I still feel a little bit like a fraud. That's coming up for me. I think that, you know, like I said, I'll go back to just reframing that as good. And I think it's amazing that everybody listening got a little kind of insight into mental performance skills, which is having a healthy set of self-talk scripts that you can use, because otherwise you'll listen to yourself. And that pocket jury that's not a jury of your peers, man. That is
That's right.
Those fuckers are out to get you. Yes,
they are.
Yeah.
They are. And I would love, first of all, you come up with the most beautiful analogies, because it helps people who may not understand exactly what you and I are talking about. Because you and I talk, we know immediately what we're talking about. But someone who hasn't experienced maybe as deeply as we have, it's a bit of a mystery. So you're great at explaining. You're really awesome. And you thank me, I'm thanking you, because you really are helping a ton of people with your work and your podcasts and beyond that. But that's exactly right. You know, and here's the thing, here's the hope piece to that. So for that night, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
I considered it a meditation by myself, re-entered the room. Everything was fine. Everything worked out fine. And, you know, no crises, no panic attacks, you know, nothing bad happened. The rest of the night was beautiful. And I enjoyed myself and met some really, really nice people. So there is tons of hope to this. But this is what concerns me, Charlie. There's so many people out there that don't acknowledge this, or don't have that level of self-awareness, maybe because they haven't crashed and burned in their lives. And I guess my message is, you don't have to go that far. You know, when I talk to people, I don't say that, you know, if you don't take my suggestions or other people's suggestions, you know, you're going to end up robbing banks. I mean, that's never my message. It's just kind of take a look at how you're feeling, identify your value system, I guess, write it down, a couple of words. This is what's important to me. And then, you know, creating your set of behaviors or living in a way that's consistent with that. But it's not a doom and gloom thing, but it is for a lot, unfortunately.
Well, I think to your point, I just don't think we teach people enough. We in schools, we teach them what to think, but we don't teach them how to think. It's like, okay, so the Turkish Empire fell, or the Opium Wars happened, or, the Roman Empire fell, but it's like, those are facts and you can learn those and you can learn how to learn. But teaching people
Right.
about emotional intelligence, teaching people about self-regulation. I mean, we're not the only ones that have this pocket jury. We're not the only ones. I mean, we've got a heavy negative bias. And, I think the more we can do to share. I mean, you just don't hear a lot of seasoned, mature adults at the age of 52 willing to come on a podcast and say, I had to take a break. I had to develop a self-help script, some self-talk that was affirming to me. And then I had to go use that so I could go back and enjoy my night. Now, for you, I'll say this. For you, the risk of not doing that is a potential relapse. And we'll get into how, opioids, solve emotional problems more than they solve physical problems, especially if you're susceptible to them. But we don't have enough people saying, this is what I run into when I feel imposter syndrome, or I feel negative self-worth, and I have a script that I use and I go outside and I do it. That's what we should be teaching people, because otherwise people just avoid it. They numb it out and they don't know that there's a solution to it. They just think, oh, that's the way my mind works. And that's why I think Carol DeWick's work at Stanford and the growth mindset is that we can reshape those neural pathways. We do have the ability to change the way we think by changing the things we say to ourselves. So I think, you can only save, or share one message at a time. But I just, if people take nothing else out of this entire episode, and I know there's going to be more, that little snippet of a feeling, an uncomfortable feeling, and then a behavior and a set of behaviors that went along with fixing it. And then the fact that you enjoyed that whole night was, to me, it was drop the mic. It was awesome. And let's
Great.
get into,
And
go ahead.
and we will, and I want to say what you were saying is, you're right. We don't teach this in schools. And where would be the best place to start? Elementary school. It would be the best place to start. And then, age appropriate, of course, and then gradually into middle school, high school, and continue on in college. While the brain's being developed, let's start focusing on that realization, that piece, the mental piece of, just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Something as simple as that, and spending some time on that, and I don't know if you're a fan of Noam Chomsky. I started, reading Professor Chomsky's work, some of it, and when I was in high school, actually, and then in college. And he's of course, the MIT linguistics professor, but he's, politics aside, he's a brilliant man, and he talks about education, and he talks about, I forget the phrase he uses, but it's basically, the student shows up and he's got an empty cup. Professor fills it with knowledge, or water equals knowledge. And then on the test, the student puts it back into the professor's pitcher. But, and this is a little bit of an aside, but, that critical thinking piece is so important. And when my son and I take walks, he and his friends will have ideas, or he'll pick up things from the news and the internet, and it's typically one-sided. And I always say, well, and maybe law school put this into my brain or whatever, but it said, what's the other side? What's the other's argument? Because as a lawyer, of course, you need to know the other person's argument. And so, look at those sorts of things, and, understand both sides of the arguments if you can.
Yeah, for sure. I think the next thing that I found interesting is, while you're having this success, you got out of the military, and you experienced a little bit of back pain. Is that where, I mean, I know you'd probably recreationally use some marijuana and had some drinks, but you're excelling in this career of continuing to achieve, and you get through the military, and your doctor gives you some Lortab.
Yeah. I hurt my back in the Marines. I couldn't, tell the military that I was injured, because it would have derailed or slowed down my career. And again, I'm just thinking career, I need this, I need that.
Yeah.
So I grinned and bared it, and for almost 2 years, I guess, I treated it like it should have been treated, with, ice packs, heating pads. I was already in great shape, so my core strength was decent. Pardon me. But I got out and went to the Justice Department and started traveling a lot, putting on weight. Went to a local doctor in Washington, D.C. area, and he prescribed Lortab. And it was really the first time I had tried anything that strong, or really anything other than a regular Tylenol or a Motrin. So, Charlie, you want to talk about, the savior of medications for people with depression, anxiety, fear, worries, opioids. And I quickly learned that if I took a few of those, that stuff would go away.
Yeah, this is important, and I think that's why it's so easy for people to migrate into dependency, ultimately addiction, and then kind of that shattered moral compass. Those drugs work way better on emotional pain than they do physical pain. It's just what they do. And all of a sudden you get that relief. And this is where I think, the fact that we don't deal with things, ultimately, if we have an unhealthy way to deal with them, then we're going to become quote unquote addicted to escape. And that's what happened. You had all of these things, that anxiety, that depression, that worry, that fear, this false self, this, I couldn't achieve enough. And then all of a sudden that opioid, that addicted pill took it away, and your body said, well, I want that again.
Exactly. And it's just spun out of control. It was, which it does for so many. But for me, it was profound. And the doctor would continue to prescribe. And, we made it all the way up to, Percocet, 90, 120 at a time in terms of him prescribing. I was with the Justice Department. I was with the Narcotic and Dangerous Drug Section, the Criminal Division. So in his eyes, I was probably the last person to be abusing these things, but it's exactly what I was doing. And but it just like the other piece, it's a house of cards. It can't be sustained. And even doing it on a small level, if you're doing it to escape something, and it's one of the most misused prescription drugs on Wall Street right now. And when I speak with financial groups, you see the heads nodding, and they, would tell me off the record, guys would tell me off the record. It's when they want to shut off at night, that's what they'll do. And, a lot of them think that they have it under control, but these guys are, fresh out of, some of the top schools in the country, and, performing at a very high level, and managing a lot of other people's money. So they are under a lot of pressure, and they still have the same underlying issues that we call normal, but you know what I mean? Like people who don't have addiction issues right off the rip. And it's easily abused, and it's a slippery slope, because once you start down, your tolerance goes up. Your same emotional pain is still there. You haven't addressed any of that. And so, you can really be quickly off to the races with that.
And you're chasing, I think, as you said, you're chasing that dragon. And I think people, don't understand all of this, the symptoms of dependency. And I'll just highlight, because this plays into, I think, a lot of your story is, the dishonesty part. And I hear, and I'm sure you'll confirm, if you're anything like me, that, the stories you tell the doctor about where your prescription is, or how many you took, or that it's my shaving kit at the other hotel. I mean, we don't think of ourselves. I mean, you're in the law practice, you work for the Justice Department. I mean, here you are, this pillar of, the scales of justice. And I'm sure you don't think of yourself as a dishonest guy. I mean, if you're like me, just because I never put a ski mask on and robbed a Wells Fargo bank yet, I don't want to give away the whole story here, but that was my barometer for honesty. It's like, if I haven't transgressed to that level, then I'm honest. Yet I've been lying to doctors about what I'm doing. I've been lying to my family about where I am. Had dishonesty kind of sunk its way into your moral fiber in a sneaky way, Andrew?
It did. It really did. And I found myself, as things got worse, well, exactly that though. But in the beginning, it was Doc. I was in Los Angeles, for work. I left
Right.
my pills there. And in the very beginning, he said, "All right, well, no problem. I'll write you a new script. I know you're coming back tomorrow, you said, Andrew, so just go pick him up." And, he probably thought, this guy's not going to lie to me. He knew what I did. I made sure he knew what I did. Especially as I started wanting more and more and more. And, but yeah, dishonesty snuck in. Again, part of my value system is not to be a liar.
Right.
And so, but then it became even bigger stuff. It became like my behaviors changed. And, if I was late for court or late on getting something filed, or in my relationship with my wife at the time, it just seemed like everything started becoming intertwined in the lie. And sometimes, Charlie, it was for no reason whatsoever. It wasn't even to gain an advantage or to make an excuse. It was just, I don't know. I really had lost my way, and dishonesty is an awful thing.
Well, principles are like muscles, and they're very simply either exercised or they're not. And whichever muscle you exercise gets stronger. And so you're no different than me and a lot of people with substance abuse issues. I mean, we start to exercise our dishonesty muscle by lying about this, and then all of a sudden that muscle is just strong. So you ask me where I am, and I say I'm on the freeway at Canaan when I'm really still in my office or in the valley. It's a little lie, but it's just what I do. I just lie about. I've just learned that muscle, that dishonesty muscle, is stronger than my honesty muscle. I can't say I'm going to just lie about my drugs. I'm just going to lie about that. And I'm going to bracket my lying to this little place. And then it's going to stay in that place. It's like, no, bro, as soon as you start lying, you're going to be a liar. And how you do anything ultimately is how you do everything. And the next thing you know, we start to, this is the way I'll put it. And you can confirm or deny the relationship to this is we stop trusting ourselves. We don't see ourselves as trustworthy. Subconsciously, it's like, the conscious mind sets the goal. Our subconscious goes to get it. And so our conscious mind is lying and our subconscious goes, well, you're a fucking liar. So let's just lie about what we got at the grocery store. Let's lie about, what the judge said. Let's lie about, the grade I got. Let's lie about if the deal's good. It's just, you just become what you've been doing. And yeah,
right.
It just, you lose.
And what does that do to your self-esteem that you already have to struggle with? Now you've acknowledged basically, well, not only am I, a piece of crap and, a fraud, but I'm also a confirmed liar. So this is one of the exercises to reverse this, which I've practiced over the years, is look, all we have, is our words, basically. So I'm having this casual conversation the other day with a friend of mine, happens to be a judge, and but it wasn't about a case or anything. And we met for coffee, and he said, where were you before this, or something like that? And I said, oh, I was at the supermarket. But I wasn't at the supermarket. I was at a convenience store on the other side of town, and I was pointing the supermarket, like you can see me on camera, was over there. And I stopped, and so the conversation kept going, and I'm staring at this man, and I'm saying, wait a minute, I have to clarify something. I wasn't at the supermarket. I was at the 7-Eleven in that direction. And he said, well, why did you tell me you were at the supermarket? Not that it mattered.
Of course.
He laughed. And I said, Mike, I don't know. I don't know why, but I want to make sure that I clear that up with you, because I want to be exact in my words now, because of course it doesn't matter. We could have gone on with the conversation. It was irrelevant. But to me, it's the need to be exact in my words. And probably it's one of the quirks of my personality that sometimes I overdo things, but maybe I'm overdoing being careful with that, but something tells me I'm not.
You're well, I will tell you as a very objective third party, absolutely not being far reaching with that. That is foundational to our recovery and our existence as human beings, is to learn how to work the principle. I mean, if you don't want to be honest, then it doesn't really matter. If you don't see that as a principle you want to live by and it doesn't really drive your life, then you can get away with lots of shit. But if in fact
Sure.
that is a principle that you want to live by and you find it to be foundational to your life and how you want to live, then you have to exercise that muscle so that the next time you're faced with a challenge, that your honesty muscle, as you just shown, you just proved the point that your principles need to be exercised, and you're not always going to be on guard, but you've got this awareness now, which I think will be foundational to this episode, is how important self-awareness is, because you've described two incidents where you had a situation that you were uncomfortable with and you took corrective action to fix it, and you didn't have to go to bed with guilt or shame about yourself or the behavior. And that's, I think people think, and again, whether people have to correct where they were, is up to them. But if there's something you're trying to do and you're not doing it, reflecting on how do I want to improve and what can I do to improve as a human being is a really, really important exercise. And so I just, these examples, Andrew, have been so, and no surprise given how you've turned your life around, are just so important. And this is what we don't talk to people about. It's, if you want to live by a principle, and how you do anything is how you do everything. And self-discipline and self-control, they are foundational to most people's healthy sense of self-esteem. So you're building self-esteem. I mean, that was another exercise I think you would agree.
That's right.
in building your
That's right.
self-esteem.
And I also think along with that is the small things matter for me. The little things matter. And, I know that I'm never going to be this perfectly principled person. The example would be if I'm driving down the road and I see this big duffel bag on the side of the road, and there's a little bit of cash like flying out from the wind from it. I don't know why I always had this fantasy. And
so funny.
What would I do? Well, look, I don't know. But it's that kind of thing. I don't know if I'll ever be completely principled, but it's the little things. And when we're talking to younger people, part of getting the handle on the mental health piece and the depression and the anxiety, a lot of that's based in fear and self-esteem. And if we can start instilling these ideas, it's these little anecdotes maybe or something. Maybe the hope is they pick up on some of that and they start looking at themselves a little bit,
Oh, yeah, for sure they will. So you're having this great career, but you've now introduced yourselves to an increasing amount of dependence upon and probably what's morphing into a severe addiction. And so the moral compass is broken. The lies are becoming greater and greater, the dishonesty greater and greater, the moral compass shattered. And so walk us through, because I want to get to the comeback, but we're still in the midst of a setback here. So how did life turn so dramatically? I mean, I think I know, but I think in your words, we need to know how your life turned so dramatically in the opposite direction of where you were going.
Well, I left the Justice Department under some sort of, I guess, you could say kind of shady circumstances. My life had spun out of control pretty well at this point. And sometimes it's tough to talk about. I ended up leaving, and I had two young kids at the time with my wife at the time. And we ended up moving back up to New York from Washington, D.C. And we didn't move to the city. We moved upstate to where her parents were. And I got a job at a law firm. And, good law firm. Worked for one of the premier criminal defense attorneys in the country, Steve Coffey. And he brought me on to do federal work. And so I was doing federal trials and in courts in Albany and Syracuse and some stuff in New York City as well. but I couldn't get the pain meds anymore. I couldn't find a doctor in New York anywhere near the doctors in Washington, D.C. and Alexandria, Virginia. So I kept calling around trying to get Percocet, and I'd get a few here and there from doctors, but it was clear I was doctor shopping. And at this point, New York, it was out ahead of the herd in terms of the dangers of opioids. The big crisis, the epidemic had not hit yet, but they were really ahead of it. And so doctors were becoming less and less willing to prescribe. So I called a friend of mine, and he said, well, I can't get Percocet, but I can get something called Oxycontin, which we now know is heroin in a pill.
Yep.
And, so I left my law office that day and drove to his house. And I wasn't going through severe withdrawals from the Percocet or the Lortab. I felt physically uncomfortable. But I knew that would pass. And then I started using Oxycontin, not to be confused with oxycodone, which is a lesser painkiller, still very powerful, nothing to be messed with by any means. But Oxycontin was a game changer, Charlie. It was, I could function. All of the feelings of worry. Now, at this point in my career, I knew that I was capable of doing solid work. That wasn't really my concern anymore. It was my depression, my anxiety over being a dad, something as simple as, am I a good father? My relationship, for all intents and purposes, was already over. But, at that point, you're just thinking about the young kids. And, so here I am, winning trials. And I really had a good training basis in the Marine Corps and the Justice Department for trial work. I have very, very few strengths. But being on my feet in the courtroom was one of my strengths. And so I was winning and doing well. But then the Oxycontin was so powerful that, before long, I went from 180 milligram Oxycontin to almost 4 or 5 a day. And that's how quickly my tolerance built. So one day I ran out of them, and I called my same friend. Now, this is a friend I knew since I was a kid. And he said, well, the guy who was selling them, he's gone. He got arrested. He got busted. And I said, oh, well, that stinks. I guess it was a few hours later, I started going through physical Oxycontin withdrawals, which are the same, if not worse, than heroin withdrawals. At the time, I didn't know anything about heroin. And so I called him up and I said, hey, his name in the book is Charlie, actually. And I said, we'll use it here too. I said, Charlie, I'm really starting to feel sick. I'm wondering if it has anything to do with the Oxycontin or the oxys. And he goes, yeah, it does. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't, because it feels like the flu's coming on, and it's coming on like gangbusters. And he goes, no. Those are withdrawals. And now I'm throwing up in my office. I'm sweating. I got a client in the waiting room. My secretary's buzzing me and saying, are you going to see this client? What's going on? And are you okay in there? My door's closed. And so we talk on the phone. And I said, well, and I always tell this piece about it. So what kind of effing drug dealer are you if you don't have another source for these pills? And I didn't know anybody on the street. I was getting them from this one guy. So anyhow, my stomach started going through this incredible pain and tightening up. My whole body started to really, really starting to go through it. And finally on the phone, he goes, all right, just come on over. So I got in my car, I got over there. By the time I got there, I had vomit on me and a suit and tie. Had a court conference that afternoon. And on a mirror on his table, small little mirror, he had a tiny little speck of tan powder. And excuse me, I had only ever seen heroin in kilo forms from seizures that we had done as a prosecutor. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and we had been friends for an awful long time. And I should have known that he had a problem at this point, because in his apartment, his couch was gone, his table was gone, his bed was sold, his Xbox or whatever, his video thing, he had nothing left. He had a habit, and he never told me. So I did that little speck of dust on the powder on the mirror, and all of it went away. Nausea, the pain, everything. Sweating stopped within seconds, and it was heroin. And he looked at me and he said, I never wanted to show you this. I never wanted to be the one to introduce you to this. And he and I are still dear friends today, and he's clean and sober for years and years. And he's just a remarkable friend and good man. And he apologized to me later on. I'll tell you, I don't want to get ahead of the story. So within days, I was doing bags and bags of this. I guess they're called bags, but I guess the audience could, if they're not familiar, it's a dose. And it looks like a mailing stamp, like a forever stamp. It's that size. And it has a tiny little bit of heroin in it. And 10 of those is called a bundle. And 10 bundles is called a brick. And so I was probably doing 5 or 6 bundles a day after a week's time. That's how quickly my tolerance grew. And I was still going to court. I was still functioning. And this is the part that I hate to tell, because it gives the impression to my audiences that this is somehow manageable. And I am here on the Charlie Smith podcast, Overcome Out Loud, that this is not manageable. And eventually there was no amount of heroin or Oxycontin that I could do to feel better, short of dying. And I went to my boss, told him the story, and he had his own suspicions. He said, you've been walking around here like you're on a cloud. Sometimes you look great. Sometimes it looks like you haven't showered in 2 days. And it was just this constant thing of trying to score, my fix, basically. And the money was just draining out of my account. I ended up going to rehab, got out, got a job doing something, but it wasn't law. And my wife had left, she took the children with her, 2 little boys, 2 and 3. Pardon me. And she, cut off all contact. Everything had to be done through family court. And I didn't do well in family court. I had hired a lawyer who I ended up not liking. The old ego came back, thought that I could handle it on my own, and Abe Lincoln said a lawyer represents himself as a fool for a client, that old saying. And sure enough, and I was a fool. And I just, I would go through periods of not using, and I still couldn't see my children. I would go through periods of using and not get caught, still couldn't see my children. So then we set it up where I would have a visit with them once a month, supervised visit. And Charlie, I went into a depression that I can't even describe. I didn't know it was possible. I believe what it is now, having done enough research and been in the behavioral health field, that it was the point of depression that you get to right up to the point of suicide. And I really considered that, you know.
Yeah, very dark days, man. Really dark days, Andrew.
Dark.
No, I mean, it's
So
just it seems it is overwhelming at the time, and you know, I just so much compassion and so much empathy for this journey, and so much courage and vulnerability to share this. And you know, we go back to, I mean, I think that you bring up so many things, but I think, you know, the fallacy of this kind of functional addict, you know, it's like, if you look at and thank you for describing so clearly how unmanageable it really was. First of all, it's not sustainable, right? For any of us, it's, you know, the runway ends, you know, when our beliefs
right.
and our behaviors are so out of alignment, but also, you know, all of the things that you hold true, your role as a father, your role as a husband, you know, when you're chasing that high, they're all eroding, they're all not being attended to. And that's spot, you know, that's why when you see, I think when we see you in such an emotional state, it's because you know that yourself is, all of these things that you worried about yourself becoming are coming true. You're really becoming, you know, that thermostat of, you know, you become the person you conceive yourself to be, and you can't perform your way out of it. You can't trial lawyer your way out of it. You can't degree your way out of it. It's like, if you really have those limiting beliefs, and you're using a substance, that substance is truly like I think they'll say a gorilla, you know, it's done with you when the gorilla says it's done. And
That's right.
I'm just so, I'm so honored, really, I guess is probably the best word I could use to share this vulnerable moment with you, and help people understand how dark those days get. I think the world is obviously so much better off. Your family's so much better off that you found a way out, but the darkness kind of overtakes you. I mean, I just describe it like a really black cloud, and it's slowly just, you know, encompassing every bit of your existence, to where you wish for the end. Maybe for whatever reason, you know, you don't end up at the end, but the end seems imminent, and you want the end. I mean, you really, in a way, you don't want the end, but you want the end.
Right. You want the end. And, you know, one of the reasons I figured out why I still get very emotional is, you know, reliving it certainly is emotional, but also cathartic in its own way. But when I speak to people individually who call me, and I hear it in their voice that, but they're at the stage where they think that they can still manage it. And you know, I fear for them. And sometimes I tell them that, you know, when the time is right, I tell them that, you know, you're getting very close to a point that I got to. And I want you to really think about that. I want you to picture yourself in a plane in the nosedive, where all the people that wanted to help you and offered to help you, or even could have helped you that you didn't ask, you're getting to the point where they're not going to be able to help you anymore. And that's not to say stop trying. That's not to say give up, but it's cautionary, and it's upsetting to see other people go through that. But it's also gratifying to feel that, well, maybe my redemption piece, you know, for what I really did, and I know we'll get to it here in a minute, is just getting someone just to think for just a moment. You know, maybe it's the school teacher, maybe it's the construction worker, the developer, maybe it's the trader on Wall Street, or the law partner at, you know, a firm. You know, just think for a minute where you're going, because everything you've told me, things are starting to fall off. Pieces are starting to fall off of your life that you might not be able to ever truly get back. And when you get to that particular point, it's abject pain, and I don't want you to feel that pain. And there's a way of not doing it. There's a way of not feeling that pain. There's a way of there's a way out, and if you can get out and if you can put in the work, then you can live a beautiful, beautiful life, and you won't have to call me or Charlie Smith at 2 a.m. and talk through things. And I'm happy to take the calls. Absolutely. But there is a way.
Yeah,
there
man.
really
So
is a
well
way.
said. There is a way. And you're that analogy of the spiraling plane is so powerful, because it's true. I mean, a lot of people, they want to get out before that thing crashes, and you're at the controls, and you really, I think it's a disservice that I think is spoken about too much, which is hitting rock bottom. And the truth is, you don't have to get any sicker to get better. You can pull that plane out of that tailspin.
That's right.
At 30,000 feet, at 25,000 feet. I mean, it does go all the way down. It does crash. It is scorched earth.
It will.
That does, but you don't have to. You can grab the co-pilot. You could say,
you got to hit rock bottom. I hate that turn.
You don't. It's when you stop digging, man. You can turn that thing. And I love the analogy, because I'm like, and do it while there's people in the, pull that thing. You're going to save a lot of people if you can, right that ship earlier on in that decline. And and I know you weren't able to do that yet, and depression took over, and you were still, like I said earlier, what you don't deal with will deal with you. And so what was the next, how did this story get worse?
So the story really, things continued to get worse. To the point where I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to function, didn't want to live. As you said, I did. I wanted it to be over with. I wasn't using drugs at that point. Nothing was fun. I was using drugs, but not to be happy and not to be high. And, those days were over, same thing with drinking, right? I remember back in college, drinking parties. It was fun. You went home, and then the next day, you went and played football, or you did whatever with your buddies from college. But eventually that became, drinking vodka in the morning, as a professional, just to get the shakes, wake up for the day. So anyhow, for me, the depression and fear became so strong. I was driving to family court one day, and I knew that I was just going to get another beat down, that nothing would really change. It was just kind of like a conference. Okay, we'll set the matter down for another 6 months, was basically it. I couldn't live without my sons. And they were the most, it's hard to explain to people, because it's easy to say, well, why didn't you just stop? Why didn't you do it for them? But I had already crossed that line. I crossed the line of, where I was in the compulsion stage of my addiction and my use, that I was too far gone. And without professional help, I could not have pulled out. And so anyhow, so I'm driving.
Just to give people a visual of this, I mean, if anybody's ever watched Star Wars, when you get locked into the tractor beam and it's a force that's just pulling you in to the ship, and you can't break, and they're pushing all the buttons, and it's like you're going into, that's what it's like, what you're describing. It's like there's no buttons to push, there's no levers to pull. That tractor beam of addiction and depression has you locked in, and without an intervention of some sort, from the outside, and a willingness to actually engage in some different behaviors, you're going where it's taking you. And it really is a force that you can't contend with on your own. And so I think it's right that you describe it as, you can't make someone afraid. You can't fear them into it. You can't shame them into it. You can't it's got you, and it's going, and we'll hear what finally turned you around. But I think it's a good description for people to understand that, kids won't pull you out. I mean, it's got you. And so, and until you're ready to change, you're ready to change and see a reason to change and start to behave different. It's going to take you where it's going to take you.
Exactly. And by the way, another great analogy, because that's exactly what it is. There is no stick to pull up anymore in the aircraft
Yeah.
too. That's so instead of going to family court, I had this sense of, I'm crying the entire time in my car by myself. It wasn't my car, it was a borrowed car. And from where I live to family court, I'm just crying, just weeping. And I get to the exit up in Saratoga, New York, and a lot of people know that for its racetrack, and it's a beautiful town. And I stopped crying all of a sudden. And I drove right past the exit. I just watched it as I went by and kept driving. And I was in this strange headspace. And I remember it kind of vividly right now. And everything came a little bit brighter. And I kept driving. And I took the exit off the Northway into Lake George, New York. And I went to the first bank that I found, and I went in and I robbed it.
I mean, that is, and I mean, it's almost surreal as you tell that story, as you sit here and you listen to the kind of the fog come over you, and the stillness of the moment, and things seem clear, and your mind is saying, we're going to pull into this bank and we're going to find another way to avoid everything that we want to avoid. And this time it's got some real consequences. I mean, had you ever had any at robbing a bank, had any of that ever come across your mind, or was this just literally out of the blue, so to speak?
This was literally out of the blue.
Wow.
And like, I guess growing up and at different times, you see it on TV, you see it in the movies, and you're like, geez, I could never rob a bank, or like armored cars and stuff. And I don't know, I guess I'm not built that way. I'm not built to think that's somehow okay to do that. But I did it. And even as I'm sitting here now, I'm feeling this, I guess what I'm feeling is guilty about it. And we could talk about that in a minute, but I was so out of control. And this is what I think I figured out, is that by taking that act, by doing that, by walking in, it may have been the only time at that point in my life where I had control over anything at all. I had the control to make a decision, clearly an awful decision, and I'm ashamed of it and embarrassed by it. But I made the decision to walk in the bank and go to that little kiosk and write a demand note, and stand in line and wait for my turn and go up and pass that note to this teller, and take the money, get back in my car, and just drive. And I drove until I almost ran out of gas, and I stopped and got more gas, and eventually made it home. And I didn't tell anybody I was doing it, even like a best friend or the guy that I was getting heroin from. He wasn't telling him about it. And then so over the course of the next few weeks, I was in this zone of using, getting sick. And when I explain the sickness, if you've never been through it, it's hard to explain, but the withdrawals are it's not just throwing up and sweating, that's how it's kind of portrayed, but it's a physical, like your body tenses up and you lose muscular control. And it's by far the most painful thing I've ever been through. And I ended up, robbing 5 more banks and 2 large grocery stores at their money in their offices at the grocery stores. Never had a weapon, threatened violence in my note, and which came back to haunt me, but haunt me in a different way. It haunted me in the sentence that I received, which I deserved every single day of what I received. But before we get to that, I want to tell you this quick thing that did happen.
Yeah, please.
I, one morning, I'd robbed the bank a couple days earlier and had cash in my pocket. And I called my guy and he wasn't around. But I knew I needed heroin, otherwise I was going to get sick. And so I drove into an area in South Albany and parked my car. And this guy gets in the car. A few people had walked by. This one particular gentleman gets in the car. He kind of knew what I wanted. I knew he had it. And I told him I wanted a bundle of heroin, so 10 bags. And as I'm getting the money out of my pocket, again, I'm out of my mind. I had lost my way at this point, and I pulled out all the money that I had in my pocket. And as I turn to give him the money, he puts his gun to my head. And I could feel the barrel on my head, on my temple, and I froze. And he grabbed the money out of my hand. And as he's grabbing the money out of my hand, he pulls the trigger, and the gun jams. The handgun jams, and I went into a state of shock. And the best I can remember it is I pushed him away and continued to push his body and stepped on the gas. He falls out of the car. I just tear down the road, and eventually stop at a convenience store, pull in, and I'm seeing just white light everywhere. And I go into the convenience store, and I buy Charlie, I buy a pack of cigarettes, and the guy behind the counter is looking at me like he couldn't believe it. He just couldn't believe what he was seeing. And where I was in a kind of a tough area of town with a lot of poverty. It's a very underserved population of people. And so he had seen some rough people in rough shape. But he kept staring at my pants area. And I sort of looked down, and I completely, wet my pants from the incident. I didn't even know it. That's how far gone I was. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know what time it was. And so I ended up driving to my friend's house, and we're watching TV, and over the local news, they were showing footage of a bank robber. And my back was to the TV. He's watching the TV, and we're doing our thing, using. And he looks over my shoulder, and he goes, "Dude, that's you. It looks exactly like you." And I looked back, and there were surveillance photos on the news. And I said, "No, that's not me." And there's a little bit of video, and he goes, "Andrew, that's you. You're wearing a suit and a baseball cap," which was what I wore to these banks. And I said, "No, man, that's not me. Don't be ridiculous." He goes, "Well, where are you getting this money?" And so he started to put 2 and 2 together. And but I'm in the throes of it, so I'm lying, and I don't know. He turned me in. I wasn't even thinking that far ahead. But a couple of weeks later, I got caught, and I write about it. Sheer Madness isn't about bank robbery. It's one little piece of it, but it's really about what you and I talked about in the beginning, and that's how this untreated depression and dabbling in things that make us feel better without actually getting to the source of the mental health piece can lead us down roads that we never would have imagined.
Yeah, look, Andrew, first of all, remarkable how courageous you are, and the warm blanket of shame that is the addictive cycle. I just want to point out your words. I was out of my mind, and that's really what it feels like. You're in this vortex of robbing banks, getting drugs. The addictive life, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it becomes the only life and so it's like all of these kind of grounding kind of values that you would live by. I want to be a father, I want to be a dad, I want to be an attorney, I want to that's why I said, and we talked about this early on, when you have a certain set of beliefs about yourself and you're trying to overachieve them with success, that those dials get turned down. And then look, it's no surprise that we saw Tiger Woods, a multi-time PGA major champion winner, on the side of the road in a jail cell in Florida. This is not like, I know there's guilt and shame associated with how bad we get, but we get bad. We have a certain set of beliefs that we can't live up to. And ultimately, for anybody who's on that path, and I'm not drawing conclusions about whether or not there was addiction or not. I'm just saying that we want people to see us a certain way, and our behaviors and what we're doing to achieve that are out of alignment. Ultimately, the show ends for everybody. The check always gets paid. The car will always crash. We can't, it's not sustainable. And so, bank robberies, DUIs, check cashing fraud, the list is ad infinitum. It's some people can arrest it sooner, but I wanted to ask, was there any relief at the end when you got caught? Was there any like, okay, this is over now?
There was a sense of relief. The immediate fear was that now I won't be able to use, and I'm going to get very, really, really sick here soon. That was my first thought. As the police, it pulled me out of my car, had me on the highway, helicopter overhead, police everywhere. And that was my first thought, if you can imagine.
Oh, I can.
Yeah. Was that, in a couple hours, I'm going to be throwing up, going through withdrawals. But there was a sense of relief. There was a sense of relief that I don't have to live this anymore. The problem for me was that the issue of my children was still very much alive. And now I had closed any opportunity to have a normal relationship with them. And when I talk to guys and people who are seeking treatment, and I work with lawyers and judges primarily right now, but really anybody from different walks of life. But it really has to do with, even if you don't think you have a problem, and you're riding high and you believe your own press, I see that you're believing your own press, and I did too for a period. So yeah, there was this sense of relief, but I knew the next few days was going to be hell. And I was scared to death of jail. Had never been. Little time in the brig in the military, but that was over something stupid. That was over a fight. But so it was. I was living this dichotomy of wanting my life to be either completely over, or at least now maybe I have a chance to get things together. So we're rushed to court. You know, I wouldn't sign the confession. They got all angry at me, even though they had me dead to rights. You know, I start telling this FBI agent who was interviewing me, you know, I basically, because I used to teach constitutional law at the FBI Academy.
Of course you did.
And so here I am lecturing him on, you know, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. And it was the dumbest thing. But, you know, Charlie, I wanted to feel like I was normal. I wanted to feel like I wasn't this dirty guy and all the things that I felt about myself at that time. And I actually am somewhat friends now with one of the state troopers that arrested me that day. It's unbelievable, the story. But, you know, I get rushed to the courthouse and I'm telling this court-appointed attorney who's representing me what arguments to make for bail. And, you know, Title 18, United States Code, Section 1846 and 44, you know, make these arguments. No, 1346, 1348, make these arguments. And he looked at me and goes, Andrew, they consider you a bank robber, and bank robbers don't get bail. And he was right. I didn't. I went to county jail. I had the most absurd experience of my life. Withdrew on the floor of the medical unit. They didn't give any sort of you know, buprenorphine or any sort of withdrawal medication.
This is not the easier, softer way up there in upstate New York lockup, huh?
Right, exactly. And you know, a lot of people say, well, maybe that's what you had to go through. And well, look, I had withdrawn before. That's why I knew what was coming. And then I, you know, eventually went from jail to once my sentencing, I went to federal prison and did my time there.